Welcome back to your sacred space for reflection, the subconscious classroom, your favorite sanctuary after sundown. We're honored to have your presence with us again tonight. This evening, we step softly into the veiled corners of history, where incense burns, drums echo, and the air is thick with belief. You are no longer here in the now. You are among those whose hands prepare the ancient rites, not for the living, but for what lies beyond. From the high temples of the Maya to the frost-laced bogs of Iron Age Europe, from Scythian funerals to Incan mountaintops, you bear the tools, the knowledge, the trembling duty. You are not the executioner. You are the architect of meaning, a keeper of ritual, a bridge between worlds. But before the first chant is whispered, before the blade is sanctified and the fire lit, feel free to let us know what corner of history you'd like to explore next. And if, and only if, this journey resonates with you, consider subscribing, so we may keep wandering together through the forgotten rituals of our shared past. Now breathe deep. Settle into the hush before the drums, and let your imagination walk softly through the sacred shadows. Let us begin. Part 1. The practice of human sacrifice is one of the most profound, unsettling rituals etched into the history of human civilization. From the dense jungles of the Maya heartland to the vast steppes roamed by the Scythian warriors, from the towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the sacred temples of ancient Egypt, sacrifice occupied a complex role in religious, social, and political life. It was a ritual both feared and revered, a final act that bound mortals to gods, kings, and the cosmos. Preparing for such a sacrifice was never a simple task. It demanded exacting attention to ritual purity, sacred timing, and symbolic significance. It was a day, and often weeks, marked by solemnity, intricate ceremonies, and the weaving of belief systems that shaped entire societies. To understand the process, it is vital first to comprehend the worldview that made such an act not merely acceptable but essential. In many cultures, the sacrifice of a human life was the ultimate offering to divine powers. It was believed to nourish gods, to renew cycles of life, to ensure fertility, rain, or victory in battle. The sacrificed individual often embodied cosmic principles, an earthly vessel bridging the human and the divine. Among the Maya of Central America, human sacrifice was deeply embedded in a worldview where the cosmos was a living, breathing organism. Their calendar, filled with cycles of time and ritual, dictated auspicious moments when sacrifice would renew the sun's strength or appease gods like Chak, the rain deity, or Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. Preparation began well before the day itself. Priests, adorned in ceremonial headdresses and painted bodies, undertook purification rituals. Fasting, ritual bathing, and chanting sacred texts from codices painstakingly preserved over generations. The victim, often a prisoner of war or chosen noble, was anointed with sacred oils, dressed in finery that symbolized the gods, and sometimes painted with blood-red pigment symbolizing life and death. The temple precincts, often atop towering pyramids, were scrubbed and decorated with fresh flowers, feathers, and jade ornaments. The air would be thick with incense, the sweet smoke of copal resin rising in spirals to the heavens, creating an atmosphere charged with tension and expectation. On the morning of the sacrifice, the city awoke to the sound of drums and conch shells. Processions wound their way through plazas crowded with thousands of onlookers. The victim, calm and dignified, was led to the temple altar, where the high priest awaited, ready to perform the sacred act with precise ritual tools, obsidian blades honed to razor sharpness. The act itself was not a simple killing. It was a sacred transformation. The heart, still beating, was removed and lifted high as an offering, a symbol of life given back to the gods. The body might then be cast down the pyramid steps or buried beneath the temple foundations, binding the city to divine protection. Thousands of miles away, the Scythians, nomadic warriors of the Eurasian steppe, engaged in sacrificial rites of a different character but no less profound. Their sacrifices often took place before battles or to honor fallen heroes. The preparation combined elements of brutal physical endurance with spiritual cleansing. Scythian priests, shrouded in animal skins and bearing ritual staffs, selected victims often from among captured enemies or sometimes their own kin, whose death was believed to ensure the tribe's survival and favor with the sky gods. These rituals could last for days, with feasts, music, and trance-like states induced by rhythmic dancing and chanting. The sacrificial victim might be tethered on horseback, subjected to symbolic wounds before a final, swift death by arrow or sword. The blood spilled was thought to empower warriors, turning their rage into invincible fury, while the spirit of the sacrificed was guided by shamans to the afterlife where it would continue to fight alongside the living. Turning to Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, human sacrifice took on more institutionalized forms. Although less frequent than in Mesoamerica or among the steppe nomads, evidence suggests that kings and priests in cities like Ur and Babylon sometimes offered human lives during times of crisis, famine, war, or plague. The ritual involved strict observance of divinely ordained laws. Victims could be slaves or criminals, their lives deemed forfeit as restitution to angry gods such as Marduk or Ishtar. The preparation involved ritual cleansing, binding, and sometimes symbolic adornment with precious metals and fabrics. The sacrifice was performed at ziggurats, massive steppe temples that were considered the connection point between earth and heaven. In ancient Egypt, human sacrifice was rarer but still present, especially in the earliest dynastic periods. Servants or retainers might be sacrificed to accompany pharaohs in the afterlife, ensuring their protection and service beyond death. The ritual was solemn and structured, with elaborate mummification processes sometimes applied to the sacrificed, elevating their status to divine servants. Egyptian priests, masters of ritual precision, prepared the victim with chants invoking Osiris and other deities associated with death and rebirth. The location of sacrifice was often near the tomb or temple of the deceased king, with the belief that these offerings were necessary to maintain cosmic order, known as ma'at. In each culture, preparation for human sacrifice was a performance of power, religious, political, and social. It was not simply about death, but about reinforcing hierarchies, invoking protection, and embodying the sacred. The act demanded a suspension of normal morality, replaced by a transcendent framework that gave meaning to suffering and loss. The day itself unfolded as a complex choreography. Preparers dressed in sacred garb, weapons polished to gleam, altars adorned with fresh offerings, food, flowers, incense, and symbolic objects representing fertility, war, or death. Every gesture, every chant was charged with meaning, repeated precisely as tradition dictated. The victim, often chosen for perceived purity, bravery, or symbolic value, was both revered and feared. Their role was paradoxical. They were both honored as divine emissaries and doomed as mortals giving their life for the community. The preparation also extended to the spectators, warriors, citizens, nobles, who participated in the ritual through prayers, offerings, and witnessing. This collective involvement transformed the sacrifice from a solitary act into a communal event, binding society through shared experience and belief. The risks and emotional weight borne by those preparing and performing the sacrifice were immense. Mistakes could offend the gods, causing disaster. Hesitation could be interpreted as weakness or disrespect. The atmosphere was electric with a mixture of dread, reverence, and awe. Sacrificial rituals were also occasions of social display. Nobles demonstrated power through the lavishness of offerings. Priests asserted authority by conducting rites flawlessly. Warriors showed devotion through their presence and readiness for battle. Beyond the immediate moment of sacrifice, the preparation carried long-lasting implications. It reinforced the social order, justified the rule of kings or priests, and provided a framework for understanding suffering, death, and cosmic balance. To prepare for human sacrifice was to participate in a profound intersection of life and death, power and submission, the mortal and the divine. It was a day marked by ritual intensity, cultural symbolism, and an awareness of the fragile boundary separating the worlds. As we continue this journey, we will explore the varied rituals, tools, prayers, and beliefs that shaped sacrifice in other cultures, from the fiery rites of the Aztecs to the silent reverence of the ancient Celts. Each culture reveals a different facet of this human practice, sometimes horrifying, always deeply revealing about the values and fears of the societies that practiced it. The history of human sacrifice is a window into the heart of ancient worlds, illuminating how humans sought to negotiate with powers beyond their control, to secure favor, to explain suffering, and ultimately, to connect the fleeting life with the eternal. Part 2. Across time and place, the act of preparing a human for sacrifice was not simply a matter of ritual. It was a deliberate, deeply symbolic negotiation between humans and the cosmos. The day was long and heavy, not because of the physical labor alone, but because of the emotional and spiritual gravity that surrounded the event. In the ancient world, to kill was not always to destroy. In sacrifice, it could mean to preserve, to empower, to sustain. In the Aztec Empire, at the height of its power in the 15th century, preparations for human sacrifice reached a scale, regularity, and theatricality unmatched anywhere else on Earth. The capital, Tenochtitlan, was a city of stunning architectural wonder. Its temples towered into the sky, and its plazas were flooded with sound, scent, and movement. And at the heart of this civilization was a calendar dictated by divine appetite. The Aztecs believed that the sun, the very engine of existence, required nourishment, specifically the blood and hearts of human beings. Without this offering, it was believed that the sun would falter, the cosmos would unravel, and the world would plunge into eternal night. Sacrifice was not cruelty, it was cosmological duty. The day began early. Priests of high rank, draped in jaguar pelts or eagle feathers depending on their patron deity, would rise before dawn. They washed themselves in sacred water from Lake Texcoco and smeared their faces with ceremonial soot and blood. They fasted and abstained from pleasure in the days prior, believing that their personal purity was vital to the sanctity of the ritual. Their voices were hoarse with chants. Their arms were scarred from penance. The victim, often a captured enemy warrior, but sometimes a volunteer from within Aztec society chosen for his beauty or symbolic significance, was treated with a strange duality. Reverence and doom. He might be honored at feasts, clothed in the likeness of a god, even permitted to dance or be entertained. But every step brought him closer to the altar. This contradiction was not lost on anyone. The victim was a living metaphor, a god in human form, soon to return to the heavens. As the sun climbed higher, the procession began. Dancers filled the streets. Musicians beat on huedels, large wooden drums, and blew piercing notes from conch shell horns. Incense coiled into the sky. Spectators gathered in silence or song, depending on the rite. Some wept, not necessarily from sorrow, but from the overwhelming spiritual weight of the day. Others waited in awe, believing that witnessing such a rite was a form of blessing. The steps of the Templo Mayor, the great twin temple pyramid, rose steeply. At its summit, high priests stood poised with obsidian blades, black and sharp enough to part flesh in a single movement. When the victim reached the top, he was stretched across a stone slab. His chest was opened, and the still beating heart was raised to the heavens before being placed in a ceremonial vessel. The body, now emptied of its soul, was sometimes thrown down the temple steps. In other cases, it was consumed in sacred meals or dismembered in symbolic fashion. These were not acts of savagery but of spiritual logic. To ingest a part of the god was to become closer to the divine. This belief echoed in many ancient societies, where consumption or dismemberment of the sacrificed was not an insult, but a path to transcendence. Meanwhile, in Iron Age Europe, the Celts practiced forms of human sacrifice shrouded in mist and mystery. Much of what we know comes through Roman writers and archaeological finds. Bog bodies with broken necks, bound limbs, and serene expressions, preserved in peat with startling clarity. Among the Celts, sacrifice was deeply tied to nature. Sacred groves, nematons, served as temples, far from cities, built not of stone but of trees, water, and wind. Druids, the priestly caste, were the intermediaries between the human and the natural world. They read omens in animal entrails, drew power from the phases of the moon, and selected offerings in response to famine, war, or cosmic imbalance. Preparation for sacrifice among the Celts could involve elaborate divination. Victims were selected not only by circumstance but by celestial alignment. The act was meant to restore harmony to the tribe, to the earth, to the spiritual web of existence. Some sacrifices involved drowning in sacred lakes. Others involved hanging or burning, and some, perhaps most chilling, were buried alive. What unites all of these acts across cultures is the idea of intentional death. Not murder, not execution, but a death that was prepared, sanctified, and understood to possess transformative power. This is equally true in ancient China, where human sacrifice was practiced in the Shang dynasty over 3,000 years ago. Shang kings believed that their ancestors were active forces in daily life and that appeasing them was crucial for political and natural stability. Burial sites from this period reveal mass graves, sometimes dozens of individuals, interred alongside a ruler. These sacrifices were not impulsive. They were carefully planned, with victims often chosen for specific reasons: status, purity, or symbolism. They were sometimes war captives, but others were members of the king's household, advisors, concubines, or servants. Their death ensured the king would have assistance in the afterlife. Preparing such individuals required days of ritual cleansing, and in some cases, their lives were extended with comfort and care in the final days. In other cultures, like Carthage in North Africa, the practice took an even more agonizing turn: child sacrifice. Long debated among historians, there is archaeological evidence, charred infant remains buried in ceremonial urns, suggesting that elite Carthaginians offered their own children to gods like Baal Hammon during times of immense crisis. The preparation here was perhaps the most emotionally complex. To offer one's own blood, to surrender a child in exchange for divine mercy, revealed the depth of desperation, faith, and fear. Priests would guide the families through fasting, mourning, and sacred rituals, bathing the child in oils, placing them in special garments, and whispering prayers. The fire that consumed them was not viewed as destruction but transformation, smoke carrying innocence to the heavens. In all of these societies, the preparation for human sacrifice was not simply about the death of a person. It was the staging of a cosmological event. Every motion, every object, every uttered word held sacred weight. The blade was never just a tool. It was a key. The altar was never merely stone. It was the gate. And yet, amid the profound spiritual framing of these events, one cannot overlook the human reality. Many sacrifices were made unwillingly. Many were captives, marginalized people, political pawns. While elites framed these deaths in divine terms, they were often exercises in domination, reminders of who held power over life and death. That tension between sacred intention and social control pervades every account. Even in cultures where sacrifice was voluntary, such as in the occasional Aztec ritual where a man would live for a year as the embodiment of a god before willingly walking to the altar, the act was never simple. It was layered with duty, symbolism, and sometimes terror. This complexity is what makes the history of human sacrifice both disturbing and profound. It forces us to examine the intersections of belief and power, fear and transcendence, cruelty and devotion. To walk in the footsteps of those preparing a human for sacrifice is to feel the weight of civilizations trying to hold back chaos by the most permanent of means. As dusk falls on that long day, the site of sacrifice is often cleaned, sanctified once more. Ashes are swept. Blood is washed from stones. The onlookers disperse, some in awe, others in silence. The priests descend from their trance-like states and return to their duties. The victim's soul is believed to rise, or dissolve, or move on. And life resumes, under the belief that death has purchased survival, that order has been restored, even if only for a time. Part 3. The places where human sacrifices were prepared and performed were never ordinary. They were liminal zones, thresholds between the physical world and the divine, often perched atop mountains, hidden in groves, buried deep beneath temples, or poised above great rivers. These locations became charged with supernatural expectation. The sacredness of place intensified the importance of every gesture, every utterance, every cut of the knife. Among the Inca, high in the Andes, the sacrifice of children, known as capicocha, was among the most solemn duties carried out by priests and imperial officials. These sacrifices were not acts of brutality in the eyes of the Inca, but of immense honor. Children chosen for this task were seen as pure, often of noble birth, selected for physical perfection and spiritual innocence. They were prepared for months, even years in advance. In a long and ceremonial journey, these children were led across miles of rough terrain. From the center of Cusco to the summits of snow-capped mountains, places so remote and elevated they seemed closer to the gods themselves. Along the way, they stopped at sacred sites where offerings were made. Silver llamas, gold figurines, finely woven textiles, coca leaves, and food for the ancestors. The children themselves were treated with reverence. They were fed ritual meals, dressed in elaborate ceremonial garments, and sometimes given intoxicants to ease fear or induce sleep before the final moment. Once atop the mountain, priests performed incantations, calling to the spirits of the mountains, Apis, and to Inti, the sun god. The sacrifice was carried out with chilling care, often by exposure, burial, or suffocation. The high-altitude cold preserved many of these bodies, and in modern times, archaeologists have discovered them nearly intact, hair braided, cheeks flushed, garments undisturbed, as though they were simply sleeping. The preparation for such a death was not about spectacle. It was about spiritual reciprocity. The Inca believed that by giving up their most perfect children, they were reinforcing the harmony between empire and nature, gods and people. These deaths were rare, sacred, and meant to secure divine favor over crops, weather, and political peace. Contrast this with the sacrificial rites of ancient Phoenicia, where fire played a central role. In city-states like Carthage, evidence suggests that young children were sacrificed to gods like Baal Hammon and Tanit in a large open-air sanctuary known as a Tophet. The act was seen as a desperate but potent plea during crises, plague, drought, or military threat. Preparing for this kind of sacrifice involved the entire community. Families made vows, priests gave instruction, and the temple was readied with fires and statues of the gods. Some accounts describe altars with sloped surfaces where the sacrificed would be placed, sliding down into the flames. Whether these accounts are exaggerated or literal, the emotional atmosphere would have been intense, wailing, prayers, and offerings flooding the sacred grounds. The societal weight of such an offering cannot be overstated. In giving a child, a family gave the most valued part of themselves. Whether coerced by social expectation, driven by fear, or carried by belief, the day unfolded with a crushing intensity that few could witness without trembling. In stark contrast, the Romans, rational and bureaucratic in much of their religious practice, typically avoided human sacrifice, viewing it as a remnant of barbarism. However, it would be incorrect to suggest it never happened. In times of existential crisis, even the highly structured Roman Republic turned to sacrifice. One such example occurred in 216 BCE, after Rome suffered a catastrophic defeat at the hands of Hannibal at the Battle of Cannae. Panic swept the city. In an unusual and deeply unsettling ritual, 2 Gauls and 2 Greeks, 1 man and 1 woman from each people, were buried alive in the Forum Boreum, an area dedicated to cattle trading and sacred rites. The ritual was not public, and its execution was shrouded in secrecy. Yet its preparation followed exacting religious codes. Priests known as pontifices consulted the Sibylline books, prophetic texts believed to contain divine instructions for times of crisis. The ritual, while rare, reflected the Roman willingness to momentarily abandon their norms in exchange for survival. The victims were chosen as symbolic enemies or scapegoats, and their burial alive was meant to appease the gods below, the de-inferi, spirits of the underworld. Even when Rome turned away from human sacrifice, echoes of it remained in the concept of devotio, a battlefield ritual in which a Roman general would pledge his own life to the gods of the underworld in exchange for victory. He would ride into battle fully armored, invoke the gods with formulaic chants, and deliberately throw himself into the enemy lines to die. Though technically voluntary, this practice bore all the trappings of sacrifice, ritual, symbolism, and belief in cosmic consequence. In ancient India, the Vedic period also offers glimpses into sacrificial practices where human life was sometimes offered. The Purushamita, or human sacrifice, was described in sacred Sanskrit texts. Though most scholars agree that by the time these texts were codified, the sacrifices had become largely symbolic or theoretical, they still demonstrate a worldview where cosmic order, RTA, was upheld through sacrificial exchange. Preparation for a Vedic sacrifice was intricate. The priests, called Brahmins, performed days or weeks of fire rituals, chanting hymns from the Rig Veda, offering clarified butter, ghee, grains, and soma, an intoxicating ritual drink, into sacred flames. Every action was accompanied by precise phonetic pronunciation, believed to carry power in and of itself. The victim, whether real or symbolic, was tethered, bathed, and draped in cloth representing the 4 varnas or castes. The sacrifice itself aligned the human body with the cosmic body, each limb corresponding to a part of the universe. It was less an execution than a dismantling of form into sacred energy. In each of these cultures, from the Andes to the Indus, human sacrifice was never casual. It was the culmination of belief systems that placed humans within a tightly woven web of divine expectation and natural balance. Preparing for such a sacrifice meant entering a heightened state of spiritual awareness. It demanded ritual expertise, emotional resolve, and deep knowledge of theology, astronomy, medicine, and social order. But not every act of human sacrifice was solemn or state-sanctioned. In some cases, especially during times of chaos or social upheaval, it devolved into public frenzy. The French Revolution, with its guillotine executions in Place de la Concorde, may not be considered sacrificial in the traditional sense, but to many contemporary observers, the ritualized and repeated killing of enemies of the state carried many of the same elements: symbolic purification, public spectacle, and a belief that bloodshed could renew society. Crowds gathered daily, not out of morbid curiosity alone, but because they believed they were witnessing the rebirth of a nation through death. Names were read aloud, drums beat, the condemned were paraded in carts. Executioners performed their roles with cold efficiency. The guillotine, though a symbol of Enlightenment rationalism, functioned in many ways like an altar, collecting the blood of those deemed unfit to live in the new social order. This chilling overlap reminds us that even in so-called modern times, the psychology of sacrifice, its rhythms, symbols, and justifications can resurface in new forms. The tools change, the rhetoric evolves, but the impulse remains that the removal of one can restore the health of the many. As the day closes on yet another culture's rite, those responsible for the preparation, the priests, the community leaders, the executioners, do not walk away unchanged. They carry the spiritual burden, the public judgment, and sometimes the quiet horror of having administered death for the sake of life. They retire to silence, to ritual cleansing, or to the endless repetition of prayers meant to ease what lingers in the mind. Because even in societies where sacrifice is expected, its preparation is never mundane. It is a rehearsal of the sacred, a confrontation with mortality, a moment when all of human society stands still, holding its breath, listening for signs of divine approval. Part 4. As dusk fell across the ancient world, the final hours before a sacrifice were often the most intense, not only for the victim, but for those responsible for orchestrating the ritual. The mind of the sacrificer was a battleground of certainty and doubt, and while religion demanded precision, the human conscience often whispered its own questions. Among the ancient Israelites, human sacrifice was a charged and complex concept. Though widely condemned in later Hebrew texts, it's clear that earlier periods in Canaanite-influenced regions saw the practice, particularly in the cult of Molech, where children were allegedly offered by fire in the Valley of Hinnom. The Book of Kings recounts episodes where kings, under foreign influence or in times of distress, permitted the sacrifice of sons to appease divine wrath. Yet even in these grim accounts, the preparation held consistent patterns. The ritual site would be outside the city walls, set apart from society, a space to perform what was seen as necessary but dangerous. Fires would be built, statues of the deity, sometimes bronze effigies with outstretched arms, served as both altar and symbol. Priests or elders conducted prayers or chants, the exact words lost to time but likely invoking protection, purification, or submission. As monotheism took deeper hold, especially under later prophets, these practices were reframed as abominations, remnants of a morally lost era. And still, they left their mark, lingering in scripture as a warning of what desperation or dogma can compel. Across the Mediterranean, another ancient society combined theater, politics, and religion with sacrifice: ancient Greece. Though not as routine or central as in Mesoamerican cultures, human sacrifice in Greece appeared during moments of intense crisis or mythic significance. One famous account centers around the tale of Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter Iphigenia to appease Artemis and gain safe passage to Troy. While the historical accuracy of this tale is debated, the psychological and cultural resonance is clear. The sacrifice of the innocent, particularly of one's own blood, echoed with tragic grandeur. In certain festivals, like the Thargelia in Athens, a more symbolic form of human sacrifice was practiced. Two individuals, known as pharmakoi, were selected, often from marginalized groups, criminals, or slaves. These scapegoats were fed, paraded through the city, struck with branches, and sometimes expelled, or in earlier periods, possibly executed. The ritual transferred the community's impurities onto them, casting out symbolic sin and misfortune. Preparing for this rite was layered in contradiction. The pharmakoi were simultaneously pitted and blamed, nourished and beaten, made sacred and disposable. Priests, magistrates, and citizens all played roles, creating a public performance of purification. Through this, society reaffirmed its boundaries between purity and pollution, citizen and outsider, divine favor and wrath. To understand the mindset of those preparing these rituals, one must grasp the ancient idea of miasma, ritual pollution. In many societies, death itself, even sacred death, was a pollutant. Those who prepared the victim, handled the body, or even witnessed the act, were often required to undergo ritual cleansing after. In Mesopotamia, this meant bathing in river water, abstaining from certain foods, or isolating for days. In Greece, this included visits to sanctuaries, the burning of clothes worn during the ritual, or fumigating the home. This sense of spiritual danger extended to all aspects of preparation. The selection of the sacrificial victim had to follow strict rules. They might be chosen for their beauty, age, or symbolic traits. In some cultures, no blemish or injury was permitted. In others, a deformity might indicate special spiritual significance. Either way, the victim became more than human, elevated or marked by fate. In ancient Japan, during the early Kofun period, archaeologists have discovered burials that suggest the practice of Haidobashira, or human pillars, sacrifices interred beneath bridges, castles, or dams to placate spirits and ensure the longevity of a structure. Though records are sparse and sometimes mixed with folklore, the underlying belief is clear. The soul of a person could anchor the integrity of a man-made object. Those chosen were believed to become guardians. The preparation would include ceremonial garments, ancestral prayers, and sometimes the carving of symbols or amulets buried alongside the body. In later centuries, these practices faded, replaced by symbolic offerings or effigies. Yet the belief in the spiritual resonance of sacrifice endured, evolving into rituals of paper talismans, rice offerings, or prayers inscribed on wooden plaques. Moving westward, in West African societies like the Dahomey Kingdom, human sacrifice was performed at the annual customs of the kings. Elaborate ceremonies held to honor ancestors and reinforce royal authority. Captives taken in war, criminals, or even members of the court could be offered to the spirits of past kings, believed to reside in a complex spiritual realm. Preparations for these sacrifices were massive undertakings. Entire towns were mobilized. Drummers, dancers, diviners, and priests collaborated to transform the city into a theater of spiritual and political power. The victims were prepared with face painting, ceremonial dances, and offerings of food and drink. In some rituals, they were beheaded. In others, buried, strangled, or left as sentinels to spiritual gates. For those involved in preparation, the responsibility was twofold: to serve the ancestors and to protect the living. Mistakes were not tolerated. The wrong chant, the wrong timing, the wrong gesture could be interpreted as disrespect and invite spiritual chaos. This pressure weighed heavily on the priesthood, which underwent intense training and adhered to an inherited system of ritual codes. In the Pacific Islands, particularly in ancient Hawaii, human sacrifice played a role in both religious and legal systems. Offenders of sacred law, or kapu, could be sacrificed to appease gods like Ku, the god of war. These acts were often carried out at heiau, open-air temples made of lava rock, situated on cliffs or coastlines. Preparation for the sacrificial ceremony included days of purification for both the priests and the victim. The process involved fasting, chants in the Hawaiian language, and precise placement of the body on stone altars. The ritual was deeply connected to social control. By offering the life of someone who had defied divine or royal order, the community reinforced the sacred laws that governed all aspects of life. Even in Norse culture, where myth often collides with history, there are accounts, particularly from Ibn Fadlan, of ritualistic deaths. In his 10th century description of a Rus funeral, possibly Viking, a female slave was sacrificed to accompany her master into the afterlife. Though debated in its accuracy, the account describes days of preparation. The slave willingly volunteers, is celebrated and intoxicated, and eventually ritually slain by a priestess. The entire community participated in the process. The ship, the grave goods, the chants, and the fire, all were part of a cosmology in which death was not an end, but a continuation in another realm. The preparation involved both pageantry and tenderness, horror and honor. The farther we explore, the clearer a pattern emerges. Sacrifice, particularly human sacrifice, is never solely about the individual being offered. It's about the collective. The group seeks purification, blessing, victory, stability, or understanding. The victim is the vessel. The preparers are the conductors. The audience, willingly or not, are the participants in a ritual that reaffirms the cosmic order, however that order is defined. What makes this process even more riveting is the emotional tension buried beneath its structure. In many societies, the priest tasked with preparing the sacrifice was not indifferent. He was afraid of doing it wrong, afraid of angering the gods, afraid of what it meant to hold life in his hands. But he performed it anyway, bound by tradition and belief. The day of preparation was a psychological tightrope. In private moments, perhaps there were doubts, a glance between priests, a subtle hesitation, but outwardly, the ceremony moved forward with unshakable confidence. Every motion practiced, every line of chant memorized, every symbol placed with exacting care. As the sun set and torches flickered to life, the final preparations were made, offerings placed, instruments tuned. The victim, now anointed and dressed in ritual colors, was moved toward the sacred site. The moment neared, not with chaos, but with silence. An eerie, almost sacred calm settled over the space, as if time itself paused to watch. And in that silence, the entire weight of culture, power, and belief bore down on those preparing the act. Not just the ones with blades or ropes or altars, but the singers, the dancers, the elders watching from the shadows. Each one bore witness to the cycle repeating again. Death, not for vengeance or cruelty, but for meaning. This, then, was the purpose of the day, not merely to kill, but to connect, to tether the human world to the divine, to remind people that life, though fleeting, had weight, and that death, though brutal, could be made sacred. Part 5. In the shadowed spaces between civilization and wilderness, where religion mingled with survival and fear etched itself into ritual, some of the oldest sacrificial practices took root. The Scythians, a nomadic people who roamed the steppes of Central Asia between the 9th and 2nd centuries BCE, embodied this fusion of mobility, warfare, and mysticism. Their sacrifices were not carried out in stone temples, but under open skies, beside burial mounds and wind-whipped plains. According to accounts from ancient historians like Herodotus, the Scythians practiced human sacrifice as part of their funerary customs for high-ranking leaders. When a great chieftain died, his burial was not a solitary affair. Along with lavish goods, golden vessels, horses, weapons, human retainers and servants were sometimes slain to accompany him into the afterlife. These sacrifices included warriors, concubines, and even cupbearers, each ritually killed and buried with great precision. Preparing for such a ritual meant days of riding, gathering mourners and offerings from across vast distances. The chosen victims were not dragged unwillingly, but were often expected to comply, bound by cultural duty and belief that they were entering a second life of service. The shamans, known as eeries, performed chants and smoked sacred herbs, believed to pierce the veil between this world and the next. Before the burial, horses were sometimes strangled and arranged upright using wooden poles, as though frozen mid-gallop into eternity. Every act was steeped in spiritual choreography. The sacrifice was not brutality, it was permanence, a sealing of legacy in flesh and soil. The Scythians believed that only through this macabre replication of the chief's world could his soul travel safely into the other world. Yet even in more urbanized civilizations, echoes of this belief in accompanying the dead lingered. In ancient China during the Shang dynasty, roughly 1600 to 1046 BCE, human sacrifices were carried out in great numbers, especially at royal tombs. Oracle bones, animal bones, and turtle shells used for divination reveal inscriptions about sacrifices conducted for military victory, ancestral appeasement, and seasonal rites. Perhaps the most harrowing were the tomb sacrifices. Hundreds of attendants, guards, concubines, and even charioteers were interred alongside their masters. The preparation was methodical. Officials would coordinate lists of the dead, itemize the burial goods, and consult diviners to ensure cosmic alignment. Victims were often drugged or killed swiftly by blade or strangulation. The tombs, vast in scale, were sealed with earth and stone, ensuring both physical and spiritual security. The justification was rooted in a belief in the Tianming, the mandate of heaven. Rulers who governed well were believed to hold divine favor. But even that favor could not extend into the afterlife unless the correct sacrificial ritual was performed. Thus, sacrifice was an extension of power over people, yes, but also over destiny. However, not all sacrifices honored rulers or gods. Some were meant to contain or eliminate forces seen as dangerous to the living. In Iron Age Europe, particularly in the peat bogs of what is now Ireland, Denmark, and Germany, archaeologists have uncovered bodies preserved in startling detail. Skin intact, expressions frozen in time. These bog bodies bear signs of violent death. Strangulation, bludgeoning, slit throats, and many were placed with extreme care into the earth, often near boundaries between land and water, farm and forest. Though the exact meaning remains debated, scholars propose that these may have been apotropaic sacrifices, intended to ward off misfortune, mark seasonal changes, or pacify angry deities. The victims, both male and female, were often young adults, healthy, and unarmed. They may have been offerings during famines, celestial events, or political turmoil. Preparing these sacrifices likely involved tribal elders and spiritual leaders who interpreted omens in cloud patterns, the movement of birds, or the entrails of animals. Once chosen, the victims were ceremonially washed, perhaps adorned with herbs or garlands, and led to the site at dawn or twilight, times believed to be liminal, when the boundary between worlds was thin. The bog became a portal. The act of placing a human body into its cold, wet depths was not just disposal but surrender, a giving back to the land in hopes it would relent. In many of these cases, the sacrificial preparation required more than ritual. It required moral recalibration. The people performing these acts were not mindless zealots. They were thinkers, believers, terrified citizens. They worried about crops, invasions, child mortality. Sacrifice was a strategy of cosmic bargaining. Pain and death were exchanged for order and fertility. Even the Aztecs, arguably the civilization most popularly associated with human sacrifice, embodied this duality of brutality and beauty. Their ceremonies were vibrant with color, music, and mathematical precision. They were not constant bloodbaths, as early European accounts often portrayed, but choreographed cycles tied to calendar systems, celestial movements, and agricultural seasons. The preparation for an Aztec sacrifice could begin months in advance. The victim, often a captured enemy warrior, was treated as a living god, a teotl. He or she was fed, clothed, and sometimes paraded through the city. In the final days, they performed dances, received blessings, and were taught sacred songs. On the appointed day, they ascended the temple steps under the gaze of hundreds, priests in jaguar skins, musicians beating drums, flower petals swirling in the air. The ritual itself was public, but the preparation was intimate. Priests fasted, bled themselves, and recited long prayers to ensure they were ritually clean. Tools, obsidian blades, incense burners, ceremonial chalices were purified. Altars were smeared with symbolic substances: rubber for darkness, ochre for the sun, jade for breath. The moment of death, performed swiftly by trained hands, was not seen as a finale but a transformation. The heart, raised to the sky, was not discarded, it was given. Perhaps nowhere is the weight of preparation more vividly felt than in the sacrificial systems that bound entire empires. In these moments, sacrifice transcended individual belief. It became policy, a tool of empire, a way to say, we still control the gods. But even the grandest rituals required ordinary hands. The incense mixers, the singers who repeated the same chant for hours, the torchbearers who lit the sacred path. the women who weaved the linen to bind the limbs. These were the unseen architects of sacred death. They too bore the burden of belief. If a chant was missed, if a blade dulled, if a drumbeat faltered, it was not just embarrassment. It was fear. The gods were watching. The ancestors were listening. The sky might darken. The river might dry. The enemy might arrive. So they practiced, rehearsed, fasted, bathed, because sacrifice, though shocking to modern sensibilities, was not chaos. It was order, and order required discipline. In the final hour before a sacrifice, there is always a stillness. Whether it's the hush before a throat is cut, the moment a body tips into a grave, or the flicker of flame over bone time compresses. Everyone involved feels it, not just the victim. The whole society holds its breath. Then it happens. The body is changed. The soul, depending on belief, rises, dissolves, or returns. And those who prepared it remain, some relieved, some proud, some silently haunted. Because to prepare a human sacrifice is not to kill alone, it is to reckon with power, with belief, with the raw, trembling boundary between the human and the divine. And that reckoning never ends. Part 6. By the time Europe entered the late medieval period, the practice of human sacrifice, at least in its overt public forms, had largely been stamped out by the spread of Christianity. But sacrifice did not vanish. It evolved. It cloaked itself in legal justifications, crusading fervor, witch trials, and public executions. The knife was sheathed in ritual, still gleaming. The preparation for these acts, whether sanctioned by king, pope, or court, bore remarkable similarities to the ancient rites that came before. The condemned were paraded, purified, costumed, displayed. Executions became spectacles, as spiritually charged as any temple rite. The scaffold replaced the altar, the crowd, the congregation. Take, for example, the burning of heretics during the Inquisition. Officially, these were judicial punishments, not sacrifices. But to the masses watching, to the clerics praying, and perhaps even to the executioners themselves, they carried ritual power. The heretic's death was believed to cleanse the community, preserve divine order, and deter spiritual decay. The pyre was built meticulously, the rope tied with practiced tension. Prayers, incantations, sometimes even songs of deliverance preceded the flame. Executioners, often ostracized socially yet essential to justice, became modern inheritors of the priest's burden. They trained rigorously, not just to end life swiftly, but to do so with precision and symbolic resonance. In some towns, they wore robes or hoods. In others, they maintained strict rituals before each act, washing their hands, fasting, or whispering a creed. In cities like Paris, London, and Rome, these figures were simultaneously feared and needed. In Japan, during the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, a comparable dynamic unfolded with the role of the samurai as executioners and enforcers of social order. While the age of ritual human sacrifice had long since passed, the samurai class still participated in ceremonial killings, most notably seppuku. Seppuku, also known in the West as harakiri, was ritual suicide performed by samurai to preserve honor. But this was no spontaneous act. It was formalized, choreographed, and required multiple participants. The samurai would bathe, dress in white robes, and compose a death poem. Witnesses would gather. A second, kaishikunin, was tasked with beheading the samurai cleanly after the initial abdominal cut. The preparation was reverent. The sword was polished, the tatami mat arranged, incense burned, and while the act was voluntary, it was still sacrifice of self, of pride, of breath. It was a ritual that sanctified violence within the context of duty. Elsewhere, among the Ashanti of West Africa, echoes of earlier sacrificial traditions endured well into the 18th century. The Adwara festival, meant to purify the state and honor ancestors, included symbolic offerings of animals and, at times, humans, particularly prisoners of war. These acts reinforced royal power and cosmological balance. Preparation involved cleansing rituals, divinations by priests, and the blessing of the sacrificial instruments. Victims were fed ceremonial meals, painted with sacred patterns, and escorted through the city by chanting processions. Sometimes, they were treated with eerie reverence, addressed as if already among the spirits, fed last meals, or gifted with adornments. These practices blurred the line between execution and exaltation. It is tempting to view all of this as history, lost, archived, overcome. But sacrifice never truly left. In modern times, it became ideological. During the rise of totalitarian regimes in the 20th century, particularly under Stalinist Russia, Maoist China, and Nazi Germany, millions were sacrificed to the cause. Their deaths, though not religious, were ritualistic. Purges, public denunciations, show trials, each mirrored the logic of ancient sacrifice. Remove the polluted, restore order. These acts were prepared with terrifying efficiency. Files were gathered, confessions scripted. The condemned were given last meals, last visits, last words, just as they had been in Rome or Babylon. The public was instructed to watch, learn, absorb. These were not executions, they were civic liturgies. And in that structure lies the same psychological machinery as the most ancient sacrifices, a belief in necessary death to preserve something greater. But if death was once the price paid to gods, what happens when society stops believing in gods? In the modern age, the answer has been replace them. Replace them with the state, with ideology, with science, with spectacle. Even in the 21st century, ritualistic thinking around sacrifice endures. Consider the soldiers sent into hopeless battles, the whistleblowers destroyed by institutions, the individuals scapegoated for the failings of entire systems. Their destruction may not be called sacrifice, but structurally, psychologically, it echoes the same ancient logic. And yet, not all ritual death in history carried only horror. In some cultures, sacrifice was considered a pathway to divinity, not just for those performing the ritual, but for the one being sacrificed. Among the Inca of the Andes, particularly during the Capacocha rituals, children were sacrificed atop mountains, believed to become messengers between the people and the gods. These children were chosen for their purity, often the offspring of nobility. They were led on long pilgrimages to sacred peaks, where priests prepared them with coca leaves and chicha beer to dull the senses. The final moments were not filled with screaming crowds, but with silence and snow. The children were buried alive or killed by blunt force, preserved in the freezing mountain air. To modern eyes, it is unthinkable. But to the Inca, these acts were acts of love, of elevation, not annihilation. The families believed their children became divine, honored in both the earthly and spiritual realms. The preparation here was deeply emotional. Parents participated. Offerings were made. Sacred garments sewn by priestesses. Lamas sacrificed in parallel. The act was as much about farewell as it was about function. And the mountains themselves, Aconcagua, Ambato, Yuyaca, became altars to frozen prayers. To prepare a child for sacrifice in this context was not madness. It was faith at its most total. And perhaps that is the darkest truth behind all sacrifice. Its sincerity. The people who prepared these rituals did not see themselves as evil. They saw themselves as necessary. They wept, they prayed, They doubted, but they prepared anyway. So what lingers in us today, millennia after these rites? Perhaps it is the same instinct to find meaning in loss, to believe that death can serve something larger, to find shape in chaos even if that shape is drawn in blood. Even today, in hospitals, we speak of sacrifices made by frontline workers. In politics, leaders talk of offering up lives for the good of the nation. In entertainment, death is ritualized in fictional stories, where films and crime dramas, where the necessary death still draws tears and catharsis. Ritual death, prepared with care, witnessed by many, still binds us. And while we may no longer raise obsidian blades to the sun, we do still elevate the idea that some deaths are more than just endings. They are messages, symbols, sacraments, and those who prepare them, whether priests or presidents, carry an ancient burden. Part 7. There is something haunting about what remains after a sacrifice. Not the blood, not the broken implements, not even the stone altars or the shallow graves, but the silence. The ritual ends. The crowd disperses. The chants fade, but the silence echoes for generations. For thousands of years, societies have engaged in sacrifice as a way to bridge the gulf between the seen and unseen, whether to appease deities, fortify the dead, purify the tribe, or terrify enemies into submission. The act always carried weight far greater than its physical toll. And in that final stillness, those who prepared the sacrifice were left to wrestle with what they had done, not just with their hands, but with their beliefs. In the ancient world, memory was not passive. It was ritualized, preserved through repetition, architecture, and oral storytelling. The memory of a sacrifice was reinforced not only through yearly festivals, but through monuments, murals, sacred texts, and even weathered tools kept in temple vaults. The Maya etched their sacrificial rituals into codices and temple walls. The Norse passed them into sagas. The Chinese inscribed them onto oracle bones. Memory was immortality. Sacrifice made it so. Over time, however, sacrifice began to shift. The gods changed. The empires collapsed. The old temples crumbled. But the logic, the mindset, the cultural impulse remained. In medieval Europe, the church redefined sacrifice. Christ's crucifixion became the ultimate model. One sacred death to save many. The Eucharist ritualized this sacrifice into bread and wine. A memory transformed into metaphor, into spiritual sustenance. But elsewhere, older traditions clung on. In rural areas, in places untouched by conquest or conversion, echoes of ancient rites persisted. Effigies replaced bodies.
Animals substituta humans.
But the frameworks endured. The fields still needed blessing. The floods still needed appeasement. The dead still needed company. As the Enlightenment arrived, intellectuals dismissed ritual sacrifice as primitive, a relic of superstition and savagery. But what they failed to realize was that sacrifice is not merely about belief in gods. It is about human psychology, about coping with fear, about controlling the uncontrollable. Droughts, plagues, eclipses, these were existential terrors, and sacrifice provided a way to act in the face of helplessness. Even the modern world, cloaked in science and bureaucracy, has not escaped this impulse. Soldiers are sent to die for the nation. Activists put their bodies on the line for the cause. Frontline workers risk themselves for the collective good. These sacrifices are praised, politicized, mourned, and they are prepared. Ritual survives in the choreography of memorials, in the folding of flags, in the lighting of candles, in the solemn language of public address. We do not kill with stone knives on temple steps, but we still consecrate death with symbols. We still search for meaning in loss. Even fiction, our modern mythology, is saturated with sacrificial archetypes. The hero who gives their life to save others. The villain who must die for balance to return. From cinema to literature, we rehearse sacrifice again and again. Comforts us. It organizes the chaos. So who are the sacrificers today? Not priests or emperors, perhaps, but judges, generals, lawmakers, and thought leaders. Those who decide whose suffering is necessary, whose death is meaningful, and who prepares those sacrifices. Entire systems, entire cultures. Yet some of the old rituals still live in the shadows. In certain initiation ceremonies, in clandestine sections, in whispered traditions passed down through families. There are still places where blood seals contracts, where death is interpreted as currency. These are not relics of the past. They are living reminders that the line between ancient and modern is thin. But there is also resistance. In many cultures, former sites of sacrifice have become places of healing. Temples have become museums, altars transformed into gardens. Education, remembrance, and reconciliation have replaced silence. Indigenous communities reclaim stories that were once misrepresented. Archaeologists now approach sacrificial sites with reverence and humility, seeking not just data, but understanding. Even in Western cities, rituals of grief and memory, vigils, murals, public weeping, resurrect the communal aspect of what sacrifice once was. What then have we learned? That sacrifice at its core is about connection. It binds the living to the dead, the community to its ideals, the present to the past. It can be horrific, yes, but also profoundly human. It reflects our longing to matter, to influence forces beyond us, to shape fate even if only briefly. To prepare a human sacrifice was to perform an act so charged with meaning, it rippled across generations. It etched itself into myth, song, and ruin, and those echoes remain. The preparation was never just physical, it was emotional, philosophical, cosmic. It demanded discipline, conviction, and sometimes unbearable doubt. In the quiet before the blade fell, in the hush of a gathered crowd, in the flicker of a flame beneath the stars, humanity glimpsed something greater than itself, something terrifying, something sacred. And whether in a stone temple in Teotihuacan, a snowy pass in the Andes, a bog in Denmark, or a courtroom in modern times, that moment remains with us. Still pulsing, still whispering, still asking, what are we willing to offer and why? This is the legacy of sacrifice. Not just death, but meaning. Not just ritual, but reckoning. And in every generation, someone is still preparing it.